Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us with vinesgardens.org. We are a nonprofit here in Binghamton, working in many different capacities to grow food and grow community, including our urban farm share, our 18 community gardens, and of course, our growing Green Thumb workshop series. We want to thank you so much for joining us. And we have two really fantastic presenters today. Our first presenter is going to be Monica Ibacache. She is a very experienced and well-established permaculture designer who has worked on projects all over the world. I'm grateful to call a friend and a great mentor. And then she's going to be followed up by Kyle Burdick, who is a local specialist in permaculture here in Binghamton. He's actually one of the site coordinators for the North Side Garden on 530 State Street in Binghamton. So Monica is going to present us the big picture perspective on permaculture and the permaculture movement. And then Kyle is going to get us deep in the weeds, so to speak, and talk about what actually works in an urban environment here in Zone 5B. So the way that this workshop is going to work, I think a lot of people are familiar with Zoom at this point. You're going to notice that we're going to mute you as you enter. There will be opportunities for you to ask questions. We encourage you to write your questions in the chat box. And then at the appropriate time, we'll be reading your questions to our speakers. Monica is actually presenting to us from Oaxaca, Mexico right now. So her internet situation is a little bit different from some of us here stateside. So while she's presenting, I'm going to be clicking through her PowerPoint, and then Kyle will be presenting in a pretty typical Zoom fashion. Any questions before we begin? Okay, so actually I'm going to spotlight you for a second, Monica.
Not a problem.
Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and a little bit about how you got into permaculture and what it means to you, that'd be great. Thank you. And then let me know when
Excellent.
I should bring this.
You can definitely start the slides.
Okay.
And I would say definitely start the slides.
Okay.
We'll go there.
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for Vines for inviting me to come and talk with you guys. I'm excited to give my perspective. The permaculture world is big and broad, and I'll be touching on parts of that today. It's always a great and interesting challenge to get it down to within a short time frame. So the title of my workshop is Permaculture as a Path to a Sustainable Society. I'm going to focus on one of my bigger parts of it, which is also the work that I do with my nonprofit. So slide 2, please. Oh. Share screen slide 2. So who am I? As I said, my name is Monica Ibacache. I was born in Chile. We immigrated to the United States when I was young with my family. I'm just making sure that the slides are up. Are they up, Christina?
Hang on one second. I think that we need to give me 1 second. We're having a Zoom issue.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Yeah.
So I'll continue.
I'm going to stop share for a second. It's not you, it's me. So, 1 second.
It's totally okay. So as I was saying, I'm originally from Chile. When I was young, we lived with my grandmother and she had a garden. So very recently I did my first talk in Spanish for a Spanish nonprofit. And one of my family friends watched it and said to me, Monica, I remember family friends from when I lived in Chile watched it and said to me, I remember when you would be in the garden with your grandmother. And that was just so wild to hear because I have vague memories of it, but to have somebody else remind me of that time was just really heartwarming. So I started there. We had chickens, and then we moved to the United States. And in the US, we didn't really garden too much as a kid. I actually came to it a lot later. when I lived in Alaska, because the best place to learn how to garden is definitely going to be in Alaska, right? Really short season, horrible soil. It was a huge learning experience, but it's put me on the path. I wanted to understand why I had miniature vegetables that weren't supposed to be miniature. And it just, all of that led me to permaculture in 2007. Um, when I got to permaculture, one of the things that super appealed to me was that it was based in ethics. It was a design system that was based on how nature designed itself, and it just felt right. It was, one of my teachers would call it applied common sense. And I'm a creative problem solver by nature, and these are things that can be really helpful when you're doing permaculture designs. And I also very easily see patterns, and patterns, like I notice some when certain things happen over and over again. And that's also something that we talk about, and we will be talking about in this slideshow, about when you see patterns and you start to notice things. It uses a lot of practice of observation. Did the slideshow work?
Nikki says that yes, we can see the slideshow on both Facebook and on Zoom.
Oh, okay. We just can't see it on Zoom.
You're not
I
seeing
can't
it
see it.
now?
No, I'm not seeing it, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
What's,
Can I
no,
ask
it's
you, what
fine.
what do you see?
I see you.
You see me?
Mhm.
Okay.
It could be me. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Here, let me just say this. What slide are you on? And
I'm
then we'll
on
go from
slide
there.
2.
Great. So slide 2 it is. All right. So there we are. There's a picture of me gardening with my friends in a giant bean field. This was at my first coordinator position in 2009. But as I said before, I started gardening in Alaska in 2001. And back then I did not have a digital camera. So I don't have any pictures. I don't have any pictures from that time. All
Mhm.
right, let's go to slide 3. So who do I work with? I work with a lot of wonderful people. One is this young man, Fernando, who's in the middle picture, and he's picked his first radish, and he was really into eating the roots of the cilantro. That's actually what he's got in his mouth. But I also work, aside from my young friends, I also work with the Permaculture Institute of North America. We're a professional trade association, and I am board president. And then a newer collaboration has happened with the Women's Earth Alliance and Sierra Club, as I'm part of their grassroots women environmental leaders fellowship and a mentor. So next slide. 5. So why do I care about permaculture? I love people, and I love to garden, and I love to problem solve, and I love to be creative and make things happen. And for me in permaculture, I can do all of those things. So on the left, you'll see a design class that I did with all ages. It was actually supposed to be just for children, but I didn't know. I thought everybody was there for the class, but so I actually pulled all the parents off the sidelines too, and had them say, divided them up into design groups, and then we had a blast. Everybody was designing up gardens, their dream gardens. But I'm very manually oriented, and I love to build things. So we do a lot of building in our permaculture classes. It's it's a very large umbrella, permaculture, under which you can have so many different things that will align with it, and that you can do as a way to show how to do design. Next slide. So I founded Beyond Organic Design in 2015. I was inspired by the question, if children are to inherit the earth, are they ready? And my answer in this time of climate emergency is no, they're not. So for me, working with children, youth, and communities is about getting them ready and passing on these skills and knowledge and resources that I've accumulated over the years that could be very helpful. Next slide. Why is permaculture education important? Um, we in our program we teach cooking, we are harvesting, and then we have another one of us building. I think permaculture education is important because it's done in a way that it's hands-on, experiential, and I believe that children respond to this, youth, people respond to this. It's done not so much in a verbal way, Like it's not memorization, it's applied and hands-on. So I find that people integrate information so much faster than that. And also we're in a school system, and we're in a time in our school systems where these kinds of activities just really aren't taught as much. And for me, going from seed to plant to cooking to eating, and then eventually back to some of our plants we let go to seed again, is a cycle of nature that urban city kids just do not usually ever get. So in that way, we are also very unique. Next slide. I find that it builds on curiosity. And I find this with little kids, like the ones that found all the mushrooms, with youth 18 to 24. In the middle, they did their permaculture design. When I brought all the seeds, this was a green job training program in Camden, New Jersey. When I brought out the seeds, these kids, I call them kids, these youth, absolutely loved it. They were so fascinated. They were totally into it. It pulls out the wonder. It pulls out the curiosity, and they were fascinated. And it was so, for me, so incredibly moving. I think that as we sometimes, as depending on your school experiences, those kind of feelings can get disconnected from education. So I find that when I'm teaching this big picture perspective, it really pulls things out of people and they're engaged. And then on the top corner, we have our friend looking at a bee cob. It came out of a beehive. She's looking at honeycomb, and she was absolutely fascinated. She sat there for such a long time looking at that because it is a really beautiful thing. Next slide. All right. So what do I mean by design? The first thing I tell everyone is we're all designers. We design our lives every day. We design our rooms. We design our houses, what we want our houses to look like. We design our time. We design every day. So first thing in class, you're already designers. You've been doing it forever. You just didn't realize it. There's all kinds of designs in the world, and permaculture design is another one. Next slide. So I keep saying this permaculture. What is it? For me, permaculture is a process of designing that takes its cues from Mother Nature. Earlier, I was talking about patterns, right? Scientists will notice patterns. Ecologists will notice patterns when they're doing their observations. As people, we've been noticing patterns forever. That's why our lineages have stayed alive. We didn't eat the things that were poisonous. We didn't go into the places where all the lions were, per se. Like, we as a human are trained to survive, and we learn how to survive. And observation is a huge, huge piece of that. And patterns in nature, as we see with all these pictures, right? There's a lot of spirals. There's a lot of similarities found in all these things. All right, next slide. So patterns in nature, there are no straight lines, right? Think about it. Have you ever gone into a forest and seen a straight line of trees, or like yeah, just think about a forest, like an area that has not been landscaped. Just remember it in your mind. Were there straight lines? Was all the trees symmetrical? Were all the flowers in the same row, in one row? Were all the colors, all the white was one place, all the red was one place, all the blue? Is that what it looked like? I'm going to guess probably not. Mother Nature has a way of designing itself, and it's not based on straight lines or aesthetics. It's based on function. It's based on what the role is of the plant in that ecosystem. So when we're talking about patterns in nature and how we use them in design, there are multiple different ways that this can happen. And if you think about, one of the ways that I like to explain is, especially if like we're talking about like wave patterns, there's a lot of wave patterns in nature, and in water, waves of grain. There's a lot of that kind of motion. If you think about a rice paddy in Asia, we see a lot of rice paddies. Were those in straight lines? Generally not. Generally they're on a wave. So one of the ways to design like nature is to not plant in straight lines. That's one. Great. Next slide, please. So I had recently had a friend who does agroforestry, which is growing all kinds of different crops, like annual crops mixed in with perennial crops. It's a big field of study. And recently she asked me, she said, Monica, what is the difference between agroforestry and permaculture? Permaculture actually talks about how we meet our needs in a sustainable way, and actually even beyond sustainable, we say regenerative way. So under that big umbrella, there's so many things of permaculture. We can say the permaculture toolbox can include agroforestry, it can include alternative energy, it can include so many different things. But one of them is biomimicry. And biomimicry is wonderful because it's very philosophically aligned. And and when you learn about the principles and then you learn about biomimicry, you start to see some of those patterns. So nature runs on sunlight. Nature uses only the energy it needs. Nature fits form to function. Nature recycles everything. So these kinds of principles in biomimicry, as you will see, will also be connected to the permaculture design principles. And I'm trying to get out of the sun. Okay, there we go. Great. Thank you. Next slide. So one of the ways that permaculture design is very different is it's based in ethics. I asked some friends of mine who are professional designers, engineers, interior design.
Hey, Monica, did we lose you?
I'm back. I apologize.
No problem.
Okay, great. So with permaculture ethics, we have care for the earth, care for people, and fair share for all. Care for the earth. So what this means is, as a designer, if our ethics are not presented in the design that we create, then it's not a permaculture design. So it has to be that we're caring for the earth, that we're caring for people, and then when we design, we're not taking more than what we need. We are leaving what we need. We're leaving more for other people, right? Take your fair share of the pie, kind of an idea. So this really struck me because in permaculture philosophy, we are part of ecology. We are not separate from ecology. And that is a very different perspective than what I'd learned before. When I'd been in school and we were learning about science, it was all separate. But the idea is that if we're designing in a way that is care for the earth and care for people, then we sorry, that's really loud. We are acknowledging that everything is connected and that what we do to nature will come back to us, right? We're not separate because that separation is not real, as we're seeing now because of what our behavior how our behavior is affecting climate, et cetera, et cetera. And then one of the things I loved about the people care ethic is that I would notice that people would say for me, oh, I only care about homelessness. Oh, I only care about the polar bears. Oh, I only care about the environment, or I only care about people. But the thing is that it's all connected. We have to take care of all of it. It's not like we can say, it's not that we can't have our affinities for where we want to maybe put our time and effort, but it's this idea that if we only focus.
Monica, did we lose you again?
I'm back.
Great.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Okay. So thanks, everybody. Anyway, so with the earth's resources are limited, and that's fair share, and they need to be shared among everyone, right? Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, the 12 permaculture principles. So Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, the co-founders of permaculture, basically sat in the forest for 10 years and started to notice and take data and do this research and started to notice that Mother Nature designs itself in very specific ways. At this point, all of that has been synthesized into these design principles, right? So when we're creating a design, these are our guide points. This is what's going to help us. So we're rooted in ethics, we're led by design principles, and then when you study permaculture, you learn about the toolbox. You learned about all these techniques and applications that are based in so many, that are been gathered from so many cultures, indigenous cultures, and so many places that you have a lot of choice about what you can do with this. And every permaculture design will be very much specific to that site and to that location, to that climate. So no two permaculture designs are going to be alike that way because they're so site specific. And as you see in the middle, we have the earth care, which is the plant, fair share, which is the pie with a piece taken out, and the symbol of the people. So here we go. We're highlighting some of these design permaculture principles today. All right, next slide, please. Integrate, don't segregate. So conventional agriculture versus permaculture. Here's what we were talking about before. On one side, we have the straight lines. And then on the other side, we have the permaculture house, and things are done in a very different way. And whereas on one side, on the left side, I guess on your screen too, you'll see that the plants all match up. They're not mixed in together. Everything like is with like. And then on the other side, with permaculture sides, they're intercombined. So this is very reflective, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the principles that guide us to intercombine the plants. And then on the other side, we have a food forest. And this food forest is important because actually right now, I'm in Baja California, and I'm actually in a food forest in a desert. So well, I have a few pictures of that. And in a food forest, just a regular forest, when left alone on its own, it forms itself in all these different layers. It can be from 4 to 7. And we have the canopy layer, the biggest tree, all the way down to the first layer, which is what covers the soil. And the whys of covering the soil will be talked about in one of our other slides. So the integrate, don't segregate is really about how in nature things are not isolated, things are combined. And when they're combined for a reason. They're combined because it's better for the whole system. It makes it more resilient. It makes it stronger. Okay. And in conventional agriculture, one of the problems with conventional agriculture is it's very reliant on chemicals, pesticides. Why? Because they plant an acre of tomatoes. You've created a giant buffet for tomato-loving insects. And this is not how nature does it. In nature, the tomatoes are planted with herbs or flowers, things that would confuse the insects. It's all intercombined. So we don't advocate for that conventional style because it makes it for a less resilient and more generally chemically focused, more inputs from us, right? Great. Next slide, please. Design from patterns to details. With designs for patterns to details, we have what we call the permaculture chicken. What's great about this is that you do a lot of research. We're very research heavy because we wanted to make the errors as a designer and what you're going to put into your garden or your farm. You want to make the errors on paper. You don't want to make the errors in the ground. So when you're studying the plants, you're also going to be doing something like this. And whatever place, anything you want to put into your design, you're going to want to do this. You're going to want to think about what are the products of it? What does it produce? How does it behave? What are the intrinsic characteristics? The things that won't change, right? And what does it need? So that you are very clear about what you're bringing into your design and that it will work with everything else. So you're designing from the big patterns, right? And you're going down even to the details like these, the permaculture chicken. Actually, I've had students, young and old, do this for themselves. I would say, what do you produce? What are your behaviors? What are your intrinsic characteristics? And what are your needs? And it's always really interesting to say what people say. And if I had a workshop with you guys right now, I would be doing just that. I would have you do this. Next slide, please. Use and value renewable resources. I freaking love this principle. It's like applied common sense, because here we are. Your house is on an incline and it has a stream, right? So not only are you gathering the water off your roof, water is a renewable resource. You're gathering it off your roof, and you see the little rain barrel right there, the roof, the rain barrel, and then that water can feed into your tree. And because you're on an incline, that water then goes downhill, and you've created a groove in the land where then it goes to the next tree, and then you keep sending it downhill, and maybe you put it through a gravel or pebble thing there, and then the water kind of gets cleaned through the rocks, and then it goes into the bottom where you have more water. You've just used gravity in your favor. You're letting nature do its thing, and you're using and valuing your renewable resources. Another example of using and valuing renewable resources would be, like solar from the sun on your solar panel on your roof. And that's a renewable resource. Wind is a renewable resource, windmills. Okay, next one, please. Catch and store energy. So catch and store energy is a great one. The reason I love this one is it's for the obvious. As far as solar panels, we can catch and store energy in solar panels that will feed our house. You could even say that collecting water off the roof of your house as a rain barrel will also do the same thing. Because water, my kids will ask me, why is water an energy? And I said, have you ever seen a flood or a river? Is it leaving everything where it sits, or is it moving things along? It moves things along. Water has energy. It is a force to be reckoned with. And so catching it and storing it in whatever ways we can. If you have a garden or a farm, if you want to catch and store it in ponds or all these different ways, it's just smart, because you want to manage the water, or else it can be a destructive force. So design principle of catch and store energy. Next, please. Obtain a yield. So here we go. You can't work on an empty stomach. So whatever you're doing, make sure that you're getting something out of it, right? We were planting beans because beans add nitrogen to the soil, which is potent plant food. And this was actually in that field of beans that you saw at the beginning. And my then mentor said, all right, we're planted these beans for nitrogen. And the harvest isn't ready, but I want to go ahead and cut them down and put in something else. And I said, no, I've been taking care of these beans for like 2 months. Like, I want to eat them. And let's just wait for like another couple of weeks, and then we can cut them down. And he looks at me and he's like, you're right, Monica, we need to obtain a yield. You've put in a lot of effort, a lot of work on tending this bean field, and we should definitely get a yield out of that. So that was something that always kind of struck with me. Like, don't do things. The yield can be satisfaction. The yield can be a lot of things, but you just want to get a yield. Christina told me an amazing story about Green Path, her project in Ethiopia, and they had avocados, and then they developed these polyculture avocado trees, which take 5 to 6 years to produce an avocado. And then what they did was they created polycultures underneath. A polyculture is the opposite of a monoculture. So it was a collection of plants that all supported the tree, and they all supported each other. So what was great that they did was that while they were waiting for the trees to mature, they were growing, I think, maybe cilantro and parsley and a couple of other herbs. And they're actually able to sell those. The farmers were able to sell those for a really good price to people in close to Ethiopia. And I just thought that was fantastic, and just a brilliant way to have to be making money from annual crops while you're waiting for your perennial crops, the ones that take years and can produce for years, to mature. And then another way to obtain a yield is carrots and tomatoes. They don't compete. Carrots grow in the ground. Their little green tops grow above ground. But if you're planting carrots and tomatoes next to each other, they're not going to get in each other's way. So you can actually plant things just a lot closer together and get maximum production out of your piece of land that you're working with. And also with obtaining yield, what it says is very true. The yield of the system is limited only by the creativity of the designer. So when you're planting carrots and tomatoes together, right close together, you're being super creative. When you got polycultures, you know, Christina's idea of having polycultures on the avocado tree were also really, really smart. So next slide, please. Use and value diversity. I feel like I say this about every principle, but I freaking love this principle. It just resonates so deeply with me because I believe that nature and people are just so alike. I believe that diversity increases the resilience and the efficiency of a system. And if that system is a community, our diversity is a strength. It makes us stronger together. I have, for the plant example, I have the three sisters. So what you see on the bottom is squash. If you've ever seen squash growing, it's really big leaves and it covers the soil. That keeps the soil cool and it stops weeds from growing. Three Sisters is an indigenous plant guild, combination of plants. And they do the squash on the bottom, and then they have the corn, and then they grow the beans that vines around the stalk. Remember, beans produce nitrogen and adds nitrogen to the soil. So the beans are feeding the corn and the squash, and they're all living together in harmony. The Three Sisters is just an excellent example of a plant guild. One of the things that I came to permaculture from a background in community education, development, and organizing. For me, I had seen as I was studying social movements, because I really wanted to know what works. How do people how to have social movements reach their tipping points and been able to create change? And this is still something that I think about now a lot. And one of the ways, over and over and over again, I saw as I was looking at the women's rights movement, when I was looking at the gay rights movement, when I was looking at the American Indian movement, the civil rights movement, all these different movements, what I saw was when there were cross-class, cross-race, cross-gender alliances, the movements hit their tipping points and won. I personally feel that that is still what is true for us today. When we can come across, when we can build bridges, when we can work together, we are an unstoppable force. And I believe that now environmental organizations are working with, you know, the Climate March was a really great example of that. When they had the nurses union, the climate justice youth movement, when they had Greenpeace, when they had Sierra Club, when they had all this big, huge, wide range, big, giant alliances, people were able to see that the movement was a lot bigger. We weren't as isolated. We're just stronger when we're together. So when we're talking about plants, the Three Sisters is an excellent example of that, and there's others for sure. And as designers, it's just smart to use them. Go ahead, 22, please. Go ahead, next slide. So I'm going to move through these a little bit sooner because, well, I'm almost done, because I want to make sure to leave Kyle time. I could talk about this all day, and if anyone has questions, I will definitely hang out until the end of the talk, and I'm happy to answer questions after this. So creatively respond to change. All right. So as we know, hurricanes happen, natural disasters happen, but also very simple things can happen. Not so disastrous things can happen. But as humans, we have the ability to creatively respond to change. And as designers, we also have that ability. And when we think about like a really simple plant urban permaculture, like what happens in the city way of growing, right? We're like, okay, so here we are. We're not out in the big open prairie. We are in the city. What we have is this 30 by 30 foot garden that's got walls up along walls on three sides. And so we have limited garden space. How are we going to do this? Well, one of the ways to do it is vertical gardens. In this picture, you see that they're growing up the wall. You can grow all kinds of vining things on the wall, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, beans, all of those can be grown vertically, straight up on string, you know, if you create a trellis. Another way to creatively use and respond to change would be rooftop gardens. I've had several rooftop gardens in New York City because that is my base. And I think almost all of my gardens are on the roof, and we have them in containers, and we do vertical gardens, and everything is set up to we try to mitigate the sun because it can be really bright. We try and mitigate the wind. So there's a lot of ways to deal with it. And, you know, from a people perspective, from a society perspective, one of the things that that we can talk about is what's happening right now with COVID. People are homeschooling more than ever, and they're also getting smart, and not smart, but they're beginning to realize that they can create these education pods where they can have 3 or 4 kids to a pod and have a little community, and maybe just be able to mitigate some of what could be maybe isolating effects if they're not normally homeschooled. So, you know, I think that we're constantly thinking of ways that we can be more creative. Thank you. Next slide. Buena Fortuna Botanical Gardens is a living seed library in La Ribera, Baja California. I got 2 slides left after this. And I didn't understand, this is the entranceway. I did not understand, on the left you see a neem tree. No, actually that's not the neem tree, that's the henna. That's a henna tree. The henna plant, you know, what's used to make the designs on your skin. And then what's interesting about what is a living seed library means in tropical and desert plants, seeds do not store well. You know, some squash seeds in the Northeast, you could have them for years and years and years. Here, the neem tree, the seed will last 2 weeks. The tropical cherry, that's very close to where I'm sitting, well, those seeds will only last 3 months. In order to keep these plant species alive, we have to keep the plant alive. So the seeds are actually stored in the plants. This is a very special place. It's a very magical place. I'm so happy to be here. I'm learning so much. Buena Fortuna Botanical Gardens .com, definitely buenafortunagardens.com. It's on the next slide, but I highly recommend that you check us out. I highly recommend Beyond Organic Design is doing educational programming for them, and that's why I'm here right now working on this project. And follow us on social media, and you'll be able to see that there's lots of exciting things that will be happening as this season starts in December. And okay, next slide. There's the website address. So here, yeah, thank you. Here's the address, tours. They do tours, they do apprenticeships. There's a nursery, there's a seed library. They design gardens for the community, and they are constantly working with people locally to spread the knowledge, the seeds, the plants, so that more people have diversity in their food. These plants have been gathered from all over the world. There are thousands of plants in this 12-acre food forest. And remember that the food forest means the canopy layer, the 4 layers of the tree. Next one, please. Thank you. So, thank you for listening. Here's my email address. You are welcome to reach out to me. Our website is basically beyondorganicdesign.com or .org. And observe and interact. That's the first principle. It's one of the ones that made me so just intrigued, because when you observe your space, when you notice it for a long time, you learn a lot about it. And then when you interact with it, it can be just so much better, so much more based in knowledge. Thank you. Check.
All right. So Monica, thank you so much for sharing that presentation with us. I know it's just the tip of the iceberg. We just have a couple questions off of Facebook. So we can ask you now, or we can give the floor to Kyle, let Kyle present for a little bit, and then they'll present questions to both of you.
Sure. Are the questions like can you gauge how long they would be? I don't want to take any more time from Kyle.
Yeah, me neither. The one question is that Introduction to Patterns in Nature and Their Uses, is that a book? What books
I think
do you
there's
recommend?
definitely. I'm going to write them in the chat, and then we can answer that on Facebook. Thank you. I'll let Kyle start.
Go ahead, Kyle. Thank you so much for your patience. And we got the big picture vision, and now we're zeroing in on Binghamton.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Can you share your screen?
Yeah, let's see here. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm Kyle Burdick. I've been gardening in Binghamton for 15 years. I've been doing the Northside Community Garden for 4 years. I think this is the 4th year. And I've been looking at permaculture stuff for longer than, somewhere in the middle there. I kind of found that online, started looking at a bunch of things and said, yeah, this seems like the way to do it. I want to set up things so that they work better, easier for me. I don't want to have to be there every single day for hours and hours to get fruits and vegetables, and I want to have an awesome garden with a short amount of input, or a big input at larger intervals even. So I kind of was starting to look at things, and we talked about those things already. I'll skip ahead to this. So kind of the governing ideas in the garden that I've been trying to go with. Again, that same thing that we already saw, which is the let's use my laser pointer. You'll see some pictures of what we kind of did with the Monica was talking about guilds and polycultures, where you've got a fruit tree in the middle, but you also have a ground cover of some sort. You've got pollinators as flowers. You've got other plants for insects. There's a mulch. There's a living mulch around it, so you don't have to necessarily cover everything with mulch. If you don't want to, you can use the plants themselves to grow your own mulch. And you also got those nitrogen fixers, so you're feeding the entire system together. Specifically at the garden, what we've kind of gone with is kind of made up a term here, multiplicity of yield. So it's a community garden. It's particularly visible to passersby, and we've had our fair share of people helping themselves to different spots in the garden, and that's much easier to deal with if you've got 300 strawberry plants than if you've got one apple tree with 4 apples on it, because you basically don't get any of the apples. If you've got lots of strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, goji berries, gooseberries, blueberries, somebody can pick a bunch of those and you almost don't even notice once you've got it kind of filled in. Same thing going for that low maintenance. So we've gone with heavy wood chip mulch. The city of Binghamton actually has been very helpful with that, in terms of between VINES coordinating with them and saying, hey, can you drop off all the wood chips from all the tree cutting around the city? And they're totally okay with that. So we have pretty much a mountain of wood chips there that we're able to use and just kind of wheelbarrow over very easily to our garden. Around the edge of it, along that sort of pattern that Monica was talking about, with more organic lines, yes, we do have the standard community garden sort of milled lumber, straight lines, beds, for the gardeners themselves, but around the edges and things, we can make adjustable beds using the logs that come in with the wood chips or stones or rubble. Just kind of build something very organic, and we can change it again. When plants get bigger or a plant dies, we can move it back over and take that space back as path. Heavily use of perennials and things. Trying to focus on getting some beauty in there also. And really looking at what in the specific garden, you know, is there more sun exposure somewhere? Can I get more? Do I have shading? Do I have to pick a different plant? Can I layer in more things and get more and more in? Because at my house, I don't have a lot of room, so I do a lot of that. It seems full, but you can always find another spot to slip another plant in if you're digging through. So my main thing I wanted to talk about was the strawberries. Online, you could take a look at Back to Eden is kind of the theme. I didn't come up with this. That's where I found it. The idea is you specifically, it's for lots of things, but specifically for the strawberries, you end up, I planted them, started with 25 original plants, didn't do any extra watering or anything, left all the runners for every year till this 4th year. All that I'm really doing in terms of maintenance is initially keeping up with weeds before it gets kind of set up. But every year in the fall, once things have kind of died down, add 2 to 4 inches somewhere in there, cover everything up, just totally cover all of your strawberries with the wood chips so you can't even see any more leaves. And what that does is it gives them, you've got a new layer of mulch, they're covered up for the winter so they're protected from some of the cold, and you don't have to deal with thinning them out ever, because your weaker plants, they won't survive. They'll get buried more and more. Your runners keep rooting themselves on the top as you mulch and mulch and mulch. And you've always got fairly fresh plants. So you get rid of, oh, my strawberries are full of weeds. Oh, my strawberries have gotten old and I have to dig them all out and start all over again. Kind of all that sort of problems sort of go away with, yep, I just mulched every year. So let's look at the pictures because we're getting close to the end. So here's the first year, kind of picture at the garden. Same thing, I think, even the concepts that Monica was talking about, all these things. I had these, I put in 4 apple trees in a row along next to, you can kind of see in the back corner, there's your standard beds. We got 14, 2 rows of 7 there. But put in some trees, and I said, well, I got these trees, I got space around them, why don't I put some strawberries in? So here's the bed that did really well. June-bearing strawberries work better for this system because they're more vigorous. They'll get taller every year and pop out of those wood chips. And then each of these pictures is from a different direction to some degree, so I kind of gave you an orientation here so you can tell which way south is again. So first year, so second year, now they started to spread out some more. There's some more of them there. There's your tree again in the middle. I'm starting to add in other plants. So I had some chives grow somewhere, so those are good for breaking up either rabbits coming in and they want to chew on something that might distract them a little bit. Some different bugs and things, you can get some smells of chives. I put a double row of garlic all the way around the edge of the bed, or to some degree around the edge. Again, there's more space around the edge that you're not using. Don't take up a whole bed with it. Put your garlic right around the edge of something else. Just making more use of the space. And then you can see we kind of turned here. There's the beds in the background. And getting some decent harvest. You can see the white flowers popping through. So year 3, we'll turn and face the other way again. And you can see again, we did the garlic around the edge again. And I don't think you can see the chives in this picture, but the strawberries starting to spread out some more. Fairly good. You can see some of the green strawberries getting pretty big this year. Getting some decent harvest. Again, each year only a handful of weeds, really maintenance during the year because it's just that one cover worked out really well. And then this was this year, so things are really, really doing well. I had baskets of strawberries out of this, baskets of strawberries. Apple trees still happy in the middle, pretty well. I guess I should mention this whole property actually is on top of basically a parking lot. So this tree and all this stuff you see grown here is got about 6 to 8 inches of actual soil before it hits asphalt right there. So on top of this is really the wood chips keeping the moisture in and keeping everything happy with no watering at all. But we've got garlic, The strawberries have spread out and taken over this whole space, just continuously mulching everything out, keeping the weeds down even more than along with the wood chips. But now I'm mixing in other things. I've got walking onions. We'll talk about more of the plants. We still have more time after this. Threw some rhubarb in there because if you're gonna have strawberries, you may as well have rhubarb. Starting to get in. I said, hey, lupins are a way to do some nitrogen fixing. They're also extremely beautiful. I was really pleased with their showing of flowers this year, and chives are great and expand really quickly. And I love the flowers. You can throw them in soup and stuff. That's kind of the strawberry bed. Another example we had was out front. I kind of started with this one. This was before the strawberries. Threw a couple rhubarb plants in the middle. Had one or two sage plants originally, some chives. There again, throw some garlic around the edge. The sage went to seed and has been all over the place, and I think it's just wonderful to have it all over. A couple of lavender plants in this end. So kind of a combination herb, rhubarb, kind of different scents. There's some oregano mixed in that comes through, and I kind of let that all go to seed. And again, I'm just building a freeform border. You can see some stones there, some stones over here. I don't think you can see it in the pictures as well. To some degree here on the strawberry beds, again, they're just bordered by logs, either laying down or straight up and down, just to give people an idea of headstones where they should walk as it grows bigger and bigger, and I take over more space of the edge of the garden. It's very easy to move those around. And then here it is from the other side, so you can see a better picture of the lupins. Another apple. It's got some comfrey mixed in there, which is a good green manure plant, and also the bumblebees love those. Tons of flowers coming out of them, so they'll be all over the place getting those. That has some strawberries around it as well, some ever-bearing strawberries. I have a stack of strawberries anytime I'm at the garden. And another one we started on the other side of the garden. So again, you can see the pavement and the sidewalks. This is right in the corner, the other corner, far corner of the lot. I found these almond trees that are zone 5. I said, well, wouldn't that be awesome to have an almond tree? When have you seen that in Binghamton? So got one of those, but one here, there's another one in the other corner of the property, but this one worked out good. Basically punched a hole. This one I actually punched a hole in the pavement, dug out a little bit, put a couple of scoops of compost in there, and covered it with mulch, threw a bunch of seeds for some kale around the edges, and put the tree in. And it's been doing great this year. The original 1 packet seeds of kale actually grew up taller, went to seed a couple times, made it through the winter, and now the almond tree is about 7 or 8 feet tall. But making this picture and thinking about it reminds me I should put some more plants around it, begin to build out this this guild or this polyculture to have more things in it. I have a bunch more links in here too. I don't know if we can. Maybe we'll send those out in an email, or you can take a look at those. Just different places I've gone. Rich Soil or Permies is a big forum for permaculture. Just any question you want, and more than just planting. It's like building and planting and life and situation. Just all the ways you can apply it. Permataroff, that's a really good one. That's another major figure in permaculture. Runs that thing. Australia is big on permaculture because a lot of the original people that came up with it are from Australia, so got a lot of information there. And then Midwest Permaculture, another example. What do we think? Do we want to go through? Should I go through some of those pictures of plants quick as well?
So here's what I'm thinking, just because we're at the 1 hour mark for the event. I do want to give people the opportunity to ask questions, but I love the idea, Kyle, of you maybe going through some useful plants for this region as well. So maybe we can just read a few questions out of the chat window.
Okay.
So one question from Facebook is, Do you have dogs or pets that destroy your plants? And what are your recommendations in response to this?
Dogs or pets destroy the plants. So this is kind of like out. I mean, it's a city lot with not much of a fence, and I don't think we've had trouble with any animals really, other than humans taking things. Um, I don't have dogs at home, so I don't have to worry about that in my yard. But
I feel like Monica has dealt more with dog poo in street tree pits, right, Monica?
Definitely. Like if there's a way to put borders around your garden beds, I would definitely do that. One of the tactics is to put catnip for cats. Make a catnip patch far away from your plants that you eat, and so that they can kind of stick in that area. It's just like aside from putting up like some kind of borders or fences around your vegetable beds. And I think that that's been the most signage. And then for the people who are the owners of the pets, and then borders and or like, knee-high length borders, fences around the beds have been what I've seen has been the most useful, helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that idea of using catnip as a trap crop for felines. We do love our furry friends, but those species in a garden can potentially introduce toxins that we might not want to expose farmers or consumers to. Another question, going back to this idea of patterns in nature. I think Monica, you said you were going to recommend some books for us, or do you
Yeah, so what I did was that actually I'm on the Vines website now, and I'm on the Vines Facebook page, and I responded in there. I put in a link to an article by a woman who just from Smithsonian, an article that she wrote in Smithsonian Mag. There are lots of books about patterns in nature. Pattern literacy is one. I think that that's one that you're familiar with too, Christina.
Sure.
And then but it's an older one, and then a newer one is one written by a woman named Marissa Fessenden, and that is the link. I can also see if I can get that link and put it into this Zoom account. And the name of her book is actually Philip Ball wrote this book, and it's called Patterns in Nature: Why the Natural World Looks the Way It Does. So I would just say there's lots of information out there. There's some good videos on YouTube as well. So yeah.
Here's another question from Facebook. What about rodents in the city? What can we do about rodents? I have
One of
some
the things.
thoughts, but I'll let
Go
you
ahead.
guys. No, I'll let you guys take it away.
No, Kyle, what do you do in your gardens? Do you have a problem with that? I know we do in New York City.
I I don't think so. I think I've been okay. I mean, I pretty much compost everything, and I don't think
Okay.
it's that big of an issue, at least that I know of.
Okay. So what I've seen in New York City that people have done is that they've adopted cats. They've put up fences around their beds. They've adopted cats and have them that live outside, and they are the ones that patrol the rat problem. That's what I've seen that's been fairly successful in New York. Um, yeah. And then people, I mean, if you go, so I've also seen them put up chain, like wire, like chicken wire around the garden beds relatively high, so that in order to protect their crops as well.
Yeah, I think if you're going to put chicken wire up, it needs to be 1/4-inch wire. So actually like a very fine metal mesh.
Definitely.
Or like a hardware cloth, yeah.
More like a hardware cloth, exactly, because those rodents can squeeze through anything. And I would just say that the amount of pest pressure that you experience in a mega city, like when we talk about mega city, it'd be like New York City or Tokyo or Mumbai, like very high populations of people, is really different from the kind of pest pressure that we see here in Binghamton. Something else I think rodents respond to is just repeat harassment. And this works with groundhogs as well, but it requires a significant investment of time on your end and a lot of observation and interaction, as Monica pointed out. So actually observing where the nests actually are, maybe putting flags in them, and then repeatedly filling them with gravel. And eventually, you know, when they say kill it with kindness, you know, instead you just keep on harassing them, filling their holes with gravel, and eventually they will relocate. But yeah, I think that
You have squirrels, though. I mean, that's in that realm, I suppose.
yeah, the cutest rodents ever. And in that case, some netting, you know, some of that bird netting, if you can kind of arrange that over your plants in order to stop the squirrels, I think that's, you know, that's what's worked for me in the past. Here's another question from Facebook. Is it possible to be self-sustaining with a food forest? What factors would play into it?
I would say that it depends on what do you mean self-sustaining. Does that mean you're not going to buy rice or coffee? Because in the Northeast, I don't really, there are some things that we probably eat that we can't get for ourselves, like, you know, like chocolate. What do I do about chocolate? So I think that I'm being honest. Like, sure, you can get a lot of stuff out of a food forest. Yeah, and if you want to have a limited diet, then you could get, quote, everything out of there. But I think it just depends. Check.
Kyle, what do you think about food forests? Do you think people can be self-sufficient off of a food forest?
No, I think Monica's got the right idea. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, how much pain do you want to put yourself through? I mean, you can. Do you not have salt anymore? Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that you don't think about. You're like, well, I kind of like having
Yeah,
salt and, you know, all those extra
yeah.
little,
I like olives.
yeah, olives, olive oil, all that. Yeah.
Coconut.
I think it kind of taps into that whole idea of, well, permaculture is not just about your immediate zone and what you're producing for yourself, but also your network of people that you can trade and interact with. I would say the closest thing I've seen to people being self-sufficient off of a food forest would actually be in Ethiopia, where people are actually growing in polycultures and they have certain crops that they market and trade, specifically commodities like maize or dry beans or peas, that can be stored and transported. But people are usually growing in an agroforest where they'll have a canopy of, let's say, mangoes or avocados, and then underneath that they'll have coffee, which they would trade. And then we would encourage them to intercrop that with chilies and beans, kale, things that would actually increase nutrition. So people do live, you can survive in an agroforestry setting, but you're going to want to be able to trade or sell what it is that you have in order to get the things that you need.
Absolutely. But you can get a lot for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's a question of like, how do you define self-sufficiency?
Yeah, exactly.
Question from Facebook in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we have a serious groundhog incursion. They climb chicken wire. What can be done with such aggressive beasties?
What I've seen when I lived in the Catskills, that bean picture, what they did was that they built 4 feet into the ground and they put posts and they put fencing. And then they just made a trench all around the garden. They put in fence and post and the fence, like mesh fencing, like a small grade. What did you call that? Hardware cloth. They put that so that the groundhogs wouldn't go 4 feet below. They would just stay closer to surface. That was, we never had groundhog problems in that Catskill garden. That's one thing.
Yeah,
Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I had groundhogs for a while. I didn't dig any. I looked up and it worked for me. Was as long as you take the, like, I don't know, like 2x4 like metal like fencing, as long as you make it run out on the ground 12 inches or so, when they come up to it with their nose, they start trying to dig immediately. They don't back up and go under it. So when they go down, they hit the fence immediately, and that's been enough for me. And as long as your garden is all fenced all the way around, just bend your fence out like an L and just lay it on the ground. They're not smart enough to back off and then drill through it from outside.
Oh, I like that. Cool.
Because I don't like digging in fencing, so I just laid it there and said, "Oh, I heard this will work," and it was good. I still left it. It was still probably 3 feet up in the air, and that was enough to discourage them. But I guess it really depends on how good your stuff looks inside and how much other stuff is around.
Yeah, I'd say like if it's a private piece of like inner community gardens, you're not allowed to have dogs. But if it is a private piece of property, if you do have dogs, they can be a deterrent to groundhogs. So just another thought there. If you have a raised bed, I find a lot of the time you need to use that green plastic fencing, but you need to wrap your bed in such a way that they cannot get through it. And a lot of the time, it seems like a simple thing, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen people install that green plastic fencing the wrong way. What's aesthetically pleasing is not actually what's going to keep a groundhog out. So come springtime, we'll probably actually have some educational videos on that.
Oh, nice.
Here's a question from south side of Binghamton. This year, I've been experimenting with hugelkultur. Do you have any comments on this concept?
I can comment that it sounds great. I've never personally done it, but I'm actually thinking about, I'm working with their garden manager now here, and their soil is very sandy because it's a desert, right? I'm in a desert, and we're looking at hugelkultur as an option. So I can definitely, I can let you know. Follow the blog, but that's it for me. You, Kyle?
I'm very familiar with it. I know like Sepp Holzer and Paul Wheaton, they like that a lot. I did some in the yard, but my yard's so small it was kind of hard to squeeze all that in with everything else I got going on. Some degree of a hugelkultur going on at the community garden with my log bed edges kind of, but not so much of a let's build a big tall thing. But that's the goal, is you want to make it really tall, really steep sides, and the idea is you've got a really tall hugelkultur mound. It's got a lot, wood and sticks, and you have a lot of dirt to bury the whole thing. But you get that whole diversity of environment. But you have different environments where things like to grow. There might, one side can be very shaded. That might be good for lettuce, where the other side might be a little bit drier, or something else likes that better, more of a lavender or oregano or something. It's a very cool idea.
Yeah, and I'd say like I feel, Kyle, like what you're doing there is like I feel like what you're doing, if anybody lives in Binghamton and you want to go visit the South Side Garden at 530 State Street, it's right behind the Family Dollar on Shenango Street. I highly recommend just going and checking it out, Bonnie, because that is like a very simple variation. It's like I guess like simpler hugelkultur that Kyle was doing with the wood chips, which I do think is easier to work with, and you might get faster results. But yeah, that whole idea of like mimicking the pits and mounds that you see inside of a forest floor. And I do think that Kyle does a good job of implementing exactly that with his wood chips.
Yeah, I did want to do more with the hugelkultur. I wasn't exactly sure if the city would be okay with my dream of 7 or 8 foot tall mounds surrounding the garden beds. But
well, could be a hands-on workshop in the spring, assuming that things kind of clear up in terms of health and safety.
yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments that if anybody else wants to put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if there are any questions or topics that either Kyle or Monica want to touch upon before we close out the session? One thing that I heard Kyle mention was about orienting certain plants so that way they're facing south. For people who don't understand the importance of that, can you explain it a little bit?
Me? Yeah.
Either one of you.
Yeah, I mean, um, generally from the perspective of don't plant tall things in the way of the sun if they're on the sunny side of the garden. So I don't know if I'm trying to think of a way to explain that. I just kind of think of it as like kind of like that picture that Monica had in hers with the water running down. The water sort of flows downhill. You kind of want to set up your plants in a way that they can all see the sun. It's almost like, have you ever been in a group photo where you're trying to take a group photo, and the photographer will tell you, if you can't see me, then you're not in the photo. Your face won't be in the photo. Mm-hmm. So you kind of want to imagine all your plants are looking at the sun, trying to get in the photo. If they want to be, full sun plants, try and orient them in such a way so that if the sun is the camera, you come back and you say, okay, well, I'm going to start at the back of the property. I'm going to put some tall trees in, maybe, a walnut, an overstory kind of tree. And then I'm going to come forward and I'm going to say, put in maybe, well, I guess the walnut wouldn't be, I'm just thinking of our garden has a walnut in it. So it may be something else that is less poisonous for your plants, but a taller tree and a shorter tree, maybe a dwarf of an apple or a pear or a peach. And you're working things in around underneath them. As you come forward, you get lower and lower to like vines that stay low. And you just don't put a big tree right on the south side of your property and think that behind it you'll be able to grow all your tomatoes and cucumbers and do well with it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we've been trying to do, or I've been trying to do, is sneak things in around in a way that how can I fit all these things in and also have them all be able to get enough sun and be happy. Mm-hmm.
I would just add to that for me, permaculture is about optimal placement. It's a placement science. It's about putting things in the optimal place in your design. And those kinds of things matter, orientation, et cetera, et cetera. And because the end goal is to have a successful growing whatever you're going to grow. And there's a lot of considerations to take into account. So as permaculture designers, we put a lot of time into the research and the thinking and the creating on a piece of paper so that when we actually go to implement, we've already thought out all the possible things that could have gone wrong by inappropriate plant choice or inappropriate placement. Check.
Here's a question from Facebook. Are animals frequently integrated with permaculture, such as cows, ducks, chickens, etc.? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say it depends. Are you in New York City? Can you have chickens? Are you in the suburbs? Are you, can you have goats? Do you have a 1 acre? Like what's your situation? So it depends. And yes and no, depending on where you are. I believe that ecosystems are healthiest when animals are integrated into it, if it's possible for your situation. And there's a million ways that it could look, for sure. I'll let Kyle take it from there.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I have chickens, and I've had quite a few chickens down to I have 3 now. My lot is like 40 feet by 80 feet minus a house and a driveway and a back porch, so little tiny space. I think it's great to have, especially chickens, is when I get more room, what I want to do is actually have a setup where you have maybe a stationary chicken house in the middle and multiple chicken paddocks around that, where you rotate through and you say 1 year the chickens are in paddock 1 and there's potatoes in paddock 2 and there's corn in paddock 3 and there's, I don't know, beans and squash in the other one. And then you rotate every year. So you're getting that rotation through, you're building up nutrients, you're removing pests and weeds with the chickens. And that's what I've been able to get advantages from, is either good fertilizer from the chickens and also You can put them into an area and they'll just eat all the bugs and weeds and kind of clean it out for you, scratch it right down to nothing if you let them and give them supplementary feed. I haven't done much with anything else on the list there, but I would get ducks, and I've seen things where they let ducks go through rice paddies, and they're to weed and eat the, you know, they'll eat specific things. If you train them up from young, they'll eat all the slugs and snails and things that would eat all your plants, and that can work out really well.
Yeah, here at this desert botanical garden, we are looking at building a chicken tractor and having chickens on site in order to be able to use them for their manure and for all the reasons that Kyle said. I think they have a huge organic matter. They don't have enough organic matter in the soil. It's a desert. It's very, very sandy. Luckily, we do have a lot of water on site naturally from the wells. So I think they're a really important aspect of a design if you can have them. Check.
Yeah, as far as cows go, I mean, I think that what really stands out to me when it comes to permaculture and integrating livestock is that the livestock are mobile. They're not staying in one place. They are grazing or they're free ranging in a place where the services that they provide, aka the manure or, you know, the insects or weeds that they are eating, is actually benefiting the other crops around them. So there are definitely examples of people who are allowing their cows or their pigs to graze under fruit and nut trees in a way that they don't compete with each other, but it provides shade for the cows and the pigs and feed for them when the fruits and nuts fall down. And then the manure in turn provides nitrogen for those fruit trees. You know, and just, so yeah, there's a place for that larger livestock as well. Very different from the concentrated animal feeding operations that we see in conventional agriculture. Question from Facebook. I live in New England. The south edge of my yard is along the street with just the sidewalk between the yard and the street. What can I plant along that edge that won't be killed off by road salt? What are some salt-resistant plants?
That's a great question. I don't have experience with salt-resistant plants. I think that I would be more prone to figure out a way to do some kind of mulch or like gravel or just like not try and grow it but then that's only because I don't know anything about salt-resistant plants. So maybe Kyle?
Yeah, I don't know specifically like salt resistant, but I mean, it just because it depends on how big the property is. Like if again, my property is super small, so I ended up building beds right next to the sidewalks, and then whatever you want. I mean, I have rhubarb, basically all the plants in the garden, rhubarb, daffodils, chives, comfrey, all planted like right up to the edge of the sidewalk. At least from the road, I'm not getting that much. I don't put a whole lot of salt down, but I haven't seen a real big impact from the amount that I use to anything in particular.
He's making the recommendation, can you put in a berm along the street and have the garden side of the berm?
Again, if there's a sidewalk or something, I would almost put some sort of a border there first. If you could build it out of, you know, some sort of like heavier, like a cedar or some sort of 6x6. That's what I use. That worked really well because it gives you a nice edge to it. So you're not worrying about like, is my berm slowly migrating into the sidewalk? Because I do have a section that happens a bit. I got like handfuls of worm castings just rolling into the sidewalk. I'm like, all right, let me shovel those out every once in a while. But other than that, I mean, a berm sounds good to me. I mean, some people don't like the way that looks, but if you can get it high enough and get some shrubs on it, you can block sound from the street, which is a nice feature while growing your stuff.
I think those are great suggestions. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And actually, somebody else from the audience is suggesting to build in a raised bed. So if you make a raised bed, it would probably keep the salt out.
Yes. Yep. And I did it both ways. I took a bunch of old 6x6s and cut them to length and made a box and integrated it in just right up against the edge of the sidewalk on one side of my front yard, and then the other side I used a bunch of pavers, just kind of dug out, put in a paver edge and made it 2 or 3 high, and that gave me enough to raise the bed up and hold my mulch and stuff.
And we have a recommendation from Barbara Fontanez saying, use the edge for pollinators. Many are salt resistant pollinator plants. So I guess plants like bee balm or lavender that are a little more resistant to salt can still be really beautiful and
I have
can
heard
be
that.
tolerant of street salt.
Blake's talking about asparagus. Yes, I have heard that asparagus is resistant to salt. That, yeah, to some degree you can actually, I've heard this. I don't, take it with a grain of salt, but I've heard that you can spread some salt on your asparagus bed if the weeds have taken over too much, and to some degree the asparagus will recover quicker than the weeds will, and you can maybe maintain it that way. Generally I would stick to the mulch in general and regular weeding, but that is something I've heard.
And then the other thing that crosses my mind is that if you're concerned about, street salt getting into your plants, are you concerned about other types of pollutants from the roadside getting into your plants as well? And generally speaking, like for borders that might be exposed to toxins, I would recommend planting things that are, beneficial, like attracting pollinators, but might not necessarily be something that you're consuming directly.
Yep. Depends on your comfort level. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my whole yard is probably in the zone of where the lead paint would drop off, but I think I've been doing okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions or final thoughts? I think that's it for questions off of Facebook and Zoom. Presenters, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience before we close out?
I would just say if people are interested in learning more about permaculture, there's great documentaries you can find on YouTube. There's also the Inhabit the movie is a permaculture perspective. There have been some new documentaries that have come out that have included permaculture in it as well. I think one is called Overgrow the System, some with regenerative agriculture. So if you're interested, there's lots of resources out there. I believe that on our website, beyondorganicdesign.com or .org, there's a resources page, and it has some links to these things, at least the names, and then you can look them up. And of course, if anybody has questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Vines. Thank you, Kyle.
Monica and Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today. Thank you, Nikki, for actually proposing this whole entire workshop and organizing it. And thank you, Jabril, for helping us through all of our technology problems during this workshop. And thank you, audience, for participating. This is our last workshop for 2020. But please stay posted. Keep checking the VINES website and the VINES Facebook page for our upcoming workshops starting in 2021. Thank you so much, and have a good night and keep growing.
All right. Thanks, Monica.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Guys, this is great.